Free agent frenzy. The Devils signed 3 players to two-way deals and traded for 1 player that's under the radar, but could be very useful in the future. We have a lot to discuss in today's episode of Locked On Devils. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Elliott scores! Oh, Stevens stepped up, nailed him. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here on Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey play-by-play announcer, Devils writer for Pucks and Pitchforks, and also part-time credential MIA member Trey Matthews. Happy 4th of July to all those who celebrate. In today's episode, we're going to recap some of the recent moves the Devils have made yet again. So in segment 1, we're going to talk about some under-the-radar signings and signings that I don't really have high anticipations for either way. I view these 3 players I'm going to discuss as more of depth pieces for the Utica Comets, but maybe can be useful down the road. But like I said, I don't really have any strong feelings either way, but still the Devils did sign 3 more players to the roster, two-way deals. And then in segment 2, we're going to talk about an under-the-radar trade that Tom Fitzgerald made, which was he was able to acquire Colin Miller from the Dallas Stars in order to add more depth for the Devils blue line yet again, specifically on the right-handed side. And then in the third and final segment, we're going to look at some Devils players that are on the move because I anticipate for some of these players to no longer play for the Devils organization come next year, and they've already latched on to new homes. So we're going to talk about their contracts. I'm going to talk about like what I'm going to miss from them and also like what teams can expect from these players that they recently signed. So before we get into me discussing these 3 players that the Devils signed to two-way deals, I would say the only quote-unquote alarming thing the Devils did prior to the start of free agency was that they did not extend a qualifying offer to Nate Bastian, Michael McLeod, Jesper Boquist, and a few Utica Comets players. Now, the only player that they extended a qualifying offer to was Kevin Ball, meaning that Bastian, McLeod, and Boquist all hit unrestricted free agency, and the Devils were able to retain Bastian and McLeod, so they re-signed Bastian for 2 seasons, McLeod for 1. And I'm going to discuss McLeod and Bastian in tomorrow's episode because I can't talk about one and not the other because Bastian and McLeod are inseparable. They're the super buddies. They do everything together, including their media availability. No, I'm not kidding. They actually did their press conference jointly together. So just putting that out there. And their impact is greatly needed if the Devils want to have any sort of success come next year, because not only do the Devils have a good top 6, but they also have some good depth assets, and Bastian and McLeod play a huge part in that. So I know people sometimes shift their focus over to like Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, and Jesper Bratt, and that's great and all, but don't forget, you also need some depth pieces to take the burden off your shoulders, and players like Bastian and McLeod do so. It was a little alarming, but I figured that both of them were going to return, and lo and behold, they're both going to be back on the Devils roster come next year. So once again, we'll talk about that in tomorrow's episode. But let's look at some of these two-way contracts that the Devils have signed. So the first being, let's talk about Erik Källgren. Now, Källgren signed a 1-year contract, two-way, and we're going to read the press release courtesy of the Devils PR team. So Källgren spent parts of last 2 seasons with the Toronto Maple Leafs and posted a career 11-6-5 record since 2021-2022 season. He appeared in 10 games last year with Toronto, and he was able to record a 3-2-4 record with a 2.67 goals against average and an .898 save percentage. The 6'3", 200-pound netminder earned his first NHL win on March 15th, 2022 against the Dallas Stars after recording a 35-save shutout. Källgren became the 39th goaltender in NHL history who earned a shutout in his first career start. Now, it's worth mentioning if he does suit up in a game for the Devils come next year, he will become the 4th Swedish-born netminder to do so in Devils franchise history. The first being was Johan Hedberg, who appeared in 80 games. The second being Hardy Astrom, who appeared in 79 games. And the third being, he's actually a friend of the show, Eddie Lack, who appeared in only 4 games for the Devils, but still remains a fan favorite. So that's all you need to know for Erik Källgren. Once again, 1 year, 2-way contract worth $775,000 at the NHL level and $450,000 at the AHL level. And Källgren is sort of an interesting case for Devils in terms of being a goalie, and we're going to discuss that momentarily. But let's talk about Kyle Cristolo. So he signed a 1 year, 2-way contract worth $775,000 at the NHL level and $340,000 at the AHL level. The undrafted skater made his NHL debut on November 17th, 2017 with the Buffalo Sabres and totaled 16 career NHL games. He played in 6 contests with Detroit in the 2021-2022 season and appeared in 1 game with the San Jose Sharks last season. Worth mentioning that the 1 game that he did appear in for the Sharks, he was able to score against the Arizona Coyotes at Mullet Arena. Yeah, that's pretty cool. The only NHL game you appeared in last season, you're able to get a goal. So that's the definition of staying ready. So he stands 5'9", weighs 175 pounds. He played in 28 contests in the AHL last season with Grand Rapids and 32 games with the San Jose Barracuda. He totaled 29 points, 17 goals, 12 assists in 2022-2023. Cristolo made his professional debut in 2015-2016 with the Grand Rapids and recorded 206 career points, 89 goals, 117 assists in 367 AHL regular season games with Grand Rapids, Rochester, Lehigh Valley, and 7 games played with San Diego. He is also a Calder Cup champion with Grand Rapids in 2017. Now, here's an interesting fact for you guys. Cristolo is actually a native of Southampton, New Jersey, and he played 4 seasons for Harvard from 2012-2013 to 2015-2016. As you guys recall, I was big on Riley Walsh because his defensive line partner was Adam Fox when both of them were playing for the Harvard Crimson. So one Harvard player out the door, in comes another one. So Cristolo hails from New Jersey and also Harvard. He was an ECAC champion, and he's a 2-time ECAC Student Athlete of the Year. So there are some of his accolades while he was at Harvard. And now, last but certainly not least, Justin Dowling, who signed a 2-year, 2-way contract worth $775,000 at the NHL level and $500,000 at the AHL level. So he spent the last 2 seasons with the Vancouver organization, appearing in 22 NHL games during the 2021-2022 season. He logged his NHL debut on October 25th, 2016 with Dallas and played in 98 career NHL contests between the Stars and Vancouver, totaling 18 points, 6 goals, 12 assists. He stands 5'10", weighs 180 pounds. And like I said, he mostly has played in the AHL because he's only logged 98 career NHL games and he's 32 years of age. So like I said moments ago, I don't really have all that high expectations for any of these players. Most of these players are just meant to be like depth assets for the Utica Comets. But Källgren is an interesting case. So if you guys didn't know already, Nico Dawes recently had hip surgery, so he's going to be out for an extended period of time. So my educated guess is that Erik Källgren will sort of slide into that role, take the position of Nico Dawes temporarily. And one of the things that I've been talking about is that the Devils need a 3rd-string goalie. They need someone who would be willing to just be a healthy scratch for the most part, or maybe just come in when it's his time, whatever the case might be. Now, I know it's a 2-way contract. It's not that simple. It doesn't mean that Källgren can be brought up to the NHL, then be brought back down to the AHL. I know he would have to go through waivers and things of that nature, but still, Källgren is just a little bit different compared to Cristolo and Dowling, because I think out of all these 3 players, I think he has the best chance of just suiting up in a game for the Devils, because one of the things that the Devils need to try to work on is filling out that goalie metric, especially now that Mackenzie Blackwood is gone, Nico Dawes is hurt. So I think this is definitely quite intriguing, and I think it's going to be a good opportunity for Källgren to see what he can potentially do. So like I said, I'm keeping my expectations anywhere from low to moderate, but if I had to pick one of these players to maybe be given a chance to showcase what he can do at the NHL level, I'm going to go with Erik Källgren in this case, because he was able to get a shutout in his NHL debut. His numbers with the Toronto Maple Leafs, nothing spectacular, but I think they're going to turn to him if they're ever in a pickle and they're going to need his services, because Remember that 13-game win streak last year? Mackenzie Blackwood got hurt during those stretch of wins, and then they had to bring up Akira Schmid. He had to showcase what he could do. So I think it's one of those cases that if Akira Schmid or Vitek Vanecek get hurt and they're out for an extended period of time, maybe you could look at Eric Shalgren, but there's still plenty of time left in the offseason to try to figure out that goalie metric. But if the season were to start tomorrow, maybe you could turn to Shalgren in that case. I might be stretching a little bit. And like I said, it's a two-way contract, and I know things are not as cut and dry. I guess for me, I just don't want to push these players under the rug. So if I had to pick one of these players to maybe make somewhat of an impact at the NHL level, I would go with Shalgren. Now, we're going to talk about the Colin Miller trade momentarily and why I like it and why I think it's an underrated move by Tom Fitzgerald. But before we continue, let me tell you guys about FanDuel. So take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right, just $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over and under to who you think is going to be hitting the first home run. All in the app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official partner of Major League Baseball. Okay, so let's talk about Colin Miller and his potential impact for the Devils roster. So a few days ago, it was announced that the team acquired Colin Miller in a trade with the Dallas Stars in exchange for the team's 5th-round pick in 2025. So the Devils getting Colin Miller, who can be very serviceable toward their roster, and they only had to give up a 5th-round pick, not in next year's draft, but in 2025. I'm going to explain why that's a steal for Tom Fitzgerald momentarily, but Miller is 30 years of age. He joins New Jersey after completing his 8th NHL season. He stands 6'1". He weighs 200 pounds. The Blue Liner recorded 21 points, 6 goals, 15 assists, and 37 minutes in the penalty box in 79 regular season games with Dallas in 2022-2023. Miller's +23 plus-minus rating and 108 hits, both ranked second on Dallas for defensemen last season. The right-handed shot also appeared in his 4th postseason and skated in 10 contests with the Stars during their Stanley Cup playoff run not too long ago. So we talked about his rating amongst other Stars defensemen, but here's what I also want to put into the picture. So last season, he had a defensive point shares of 4.6, which ranked 4th amongst all Dallas players. He had 108 hits once again. That ranked 5th on the entire roster. 70 blocks, that ranked 5th on the entire roster as well. And his +23 plus-minus rating ranked 5th on the entire Dallas roster. So it's not just amongst defensemen, but it's amongst the forwards as well. Colin Miller was actually solid on the Dallas Stars blue line. Now, here's the thing. What do I think about this whole ordeal for the Devils? I think they found a diamond in the rough in Miller, and I think they were able to get a great investment because, once again, here's the thing for Miller. Here's why I think the Dallas Stars were willing to give him away on the down low. And I don't cover the Stars. I'm not locked on Stars, so I can't really give a full-fledged answer, but here's my educated guess. I think Miller kind of blew his chances with the Stars organization during their playoff run against the Vegas Golden Knights. So obviously he suited up in the games against the Seattle Kraken, but come the first 2 games against the Vegas Golden Knights, he had some boneheaded plays that resulted in some turnovers, as I like to describe it, and thus he had to view the rest of the playoff run from up in the press box because he was a healthy scratch. So I think that's why the Dallas Stars were willing to part ways with him, and they were willing to do it at such a low deal. Because the thing about Miller is that I just said, his hits is pretty high. He also has a good plus-minus rating. I know a lot of people don't like looking at the plus-minus. I personally do. I think it can tell you a few things here and there, but nonetheless, he also has a high block total, and his offensive contribution is somewhat solid, and his defensive point shares also speaks volume. And another thing that I want to highlight, he spent 37 minutes in the penalty box, like I just said moments ago. That is actually less penalty minutes compared to some of the other Devils defensemen from this past year. So his 37 penalty minutes is actually less than Brendan Smith, Dougie Hamilton, Jonas Siegenthaler, and Damon Severson. So the fact that he's getting all these hits, he's getting all these blocks, he's doing all these other defensive contributions, and he's not spending all that much time in the penalty box, I think that's also something that we should highlight, because someone like Brendan Smith, he does have a high hit total, but Brendan Smith spends a lot of time in the penalty box, which is why sometimes he could be a liability out there. And I know this player is not a defenseman, but if I had to use another example, look at someone like Miles Wood, who led the Devils in penalty minutes. Miles Wood was also known for his skating ability. He was known for being aggressive, playing tough. But once again, sometimes he was too chaotic for his own good, which is why he spent a lot of time in the penalty box. Whereas for someone like Colin Miller, he's able to do those contributions and not spend all that much time in the penalty box. And where do I see him sliding in? Well, if we look at the defensive line pairings for the Devils, I think this is the perfect scenario in which he slides into the bottom four defenseman role, similar to what Damon Severson did this past year. Now that Severson is gone, I think that's the position that Miller is going to take, because according to Daily Faceoff, they had Brendan Smith as that final right-handed defenseman paired alongside Kevin Ball for a time being for the Devils. And once again, I do like Brendan Smith as a leader within the locker room, but in terms of his playing ability, he's sometimes a liability out there. And also, it's just like, we're going to talk about this momentarily, but does that mean that Shimon Nemec won't make the opening night roster? Once again, I'll get to that in a second, but just to finish off my thought process in terms of where I see him sliding in, I think the less you ask out of Miller, I think the better he'll actually perform in a Devil sweater, because like I just said minutes ago, he was playing top minutes on the defensive line for the Dallas Stars, and he was able to have some solid contribution. So I think for the Devils, they're looking for that Damon Severson replacement, which is, you don't have to be an offensive weapon, because obviously we're going to rely on Dougie Hamilton to do a bit of the lifting of the offensive numbers for defensemen for the Devils. And also Luke Hughes is projected to make the opening night roster. He was able to showcase his skill set during the playoffs and also his 2 regular season appearances for the Devils. So I think Luke Hughes will also do a bit of the heavy lifting in terms of scoring for Devils defensemen. And then for someone like Colin Miller, while his offense is not his top priority, I presume it's not his bread and butter, it's still somewhat solid, and it can be impactful, because now the Devils sort of need that on their bottom defensive pairings, because Kevin Ball is not going to generate that much offense. So if we look at the defensive pairings for a time being for the Devils, Dougie Hamilton, Jonas Siegenthaler, Hamilton will do most of the scoring. Luke Hughes, John Marino, Luke Hughes will do most of the scoring. Kevin Ball and now possibly Colin Miller, Miller will do a bit of the scoring in that sort of aspect and how that dynamic would work. So that sort of evens out the scoring on all the defensive line pairings. And once again, I think if Miller is able to do what Damon Severson did on the bottom 4 defenseman role, and is just able to just have some solid contribution, at least defensively, and have your offense going now and again, it doesn't have to be a top priority, but still, it can be still somewhat useful for this roster, then I think this is going to be a good fit for Miller and the Devils organization. Now, the big question I'm sure a lot of you have, well, we have Shimon Nemec. Wouldn't he be ready to make the opening night roster for Devils? And the answer to that would be hypothetically yes, but we can't just give it to Nemec. He's got to earn it. Now, he did have a good showing in Utica just this past season. He appeared in 65 regular season games. He had 12 goals, 22 assists for a grand total of 34 points. And that carried over into the playoffs because he appeared in 6 games, had 1 goal, 3 assists for a grand total of 4 points. So Nemec might be ready to make the opening night roster, but once again, he needs to earn it. He needs to show that his success in the AHL can translate into the NHL. And if it can't for a time being, then let him develop in Utica just a little bit longer. No need to rush him, especially since he's still trying to get accustomed to North American style hockey. But I'd say he's well on his way. But once again, it doesn't hurt to have some depth added to your roster, similar to what I said earlier in the episode when I was discussing Nathan Bastian and also Michael McLeod, which is depth is essential if you want to make a deep playoff run. So I think for Colin Miller, I don't think he's necessarily taking Shimon Nemets's spot, but he's maybe warming it up for him in a sense, because what if Shimon Nemets doesn't perform all that well during the preseason? What if he just shows flashes that he's not really ready to be brought up to the NHL level quite yet? And that's perfectly fine. We don't need to thrust him into that role when we don't have to, but you want to have some options. So if Shimon Nemets is hypothetically not ready, and let's say the Devils roster is what it is for the time being, do you want Brendan Smith to be that everyday guy for the Devils? I sure as hell don't. I think Brendan Smith is better utilized as a seventh defenseman kind of player, or just a player who doesn't really play all that often, but is ready to go in when his number is called. So I think that's what the situation is like for Colin Miller and this trade for Tom Fitzgerald. Once again, it is a very underrated move. I like it a lot. And I think Colin Miller can sort of do what Ryan Graves was able to do in terms of the plus minus, the blocks, the defensive point shares. But at the same time, I'm sure he'd be willing to play a lesser role similar to Damon Severson, which is you're kind of taking a back seat, but your impact is still heavily utilized and still heavily magnified, which is like, I know it might not show up in the score sheet every night, but trust me, the coaching staff, the players, they are going to feel your impact. So my final verdict is I love this trade for Tom Fitzgerald. And if there's a team out there that knows how to develop and get the most out of underrated defensemen, I think it's the Devils, because they were able to do it with Jonas Siegenthaler. They were able to do it with John Marino, and they were able to do it somewhat for Ryan Graves, because the question for Ryan Graves was that, can he do it without like someone like Cale Makar, which was a great defensive unit in Colorado, and can he translate it over into the Garden State in New Jersey? He was able to do so. I have no doubt in the back of my mind that I think the Devils are going to get the most out of Colin Miller, and I think the less you ask out of him, the better he will perform. Okay, so I talked about some of the recent moves made by the Devils, who they added to their roster and who they traded for. But let's talk about some now former Devils players that are on the move, because like I said early on in the episode, some players hit the open market and they've latched on to new homes. So I'm not going to touch on Damon Severson, because I think I've talked about Severson enough and I gave you guys my thoughts on the matter. I wish Severson the best. I still think he could be a top 4 defenseman in the league. And I think the pairing of him and Ivan Provorov, while it's not going to light the league on fire, I think it's still going to be somewhat compelling to watch. And I think Columbus Blue Jackets fans should be somewhat excited. Maybe not for Mike Babcock, though. But let's start with Mackenzie Blackwood. So Blackwood was not given a qualifying offer by the Sharks, but they signed him to a 2-year contract that's worth $4.7 million, which means he'll be paid annually $2.35 million these next 2 seasons. So I've touched on Mackenzie Blackwood before, but just to give you guys my thoughts on the matter, I wish Blackwood the best. I still think that he could be a somewhat sizable goalie in this league. I think injuries, especially COVID, weren't really his friend, and that kind of sent him back a little bit. The Devils did give him the Corey Schneider treatment. At least they were able to get something out of him in this sort of aspect. But I think if Blackwood is able to just hit the reset button, start all over, and basically have that pressure alleviated off his shoulders, then I mean this honestly, I think the Sharks got a steal in regard to this trade, because Blackwood, like I said, still has a lot of potential, still relatively young, but I think his time in New Jersey, it just needed to come to an end, because I just think he hit a wall and he wasn't going to thrive here, especially with how Vitek Vanecek performed during the regular season and also how Akira Schmid performed during the playoffs. So once again, best wishes to Blackie. I hope this is the right opportunity that he wished for. And once again, maybe starting over with a rebuilding team like the Sharks, maybe it's not such a bad thing, because once again, he needs a completely new slate. So there's Blackwood's situation. Now, Ryan Graves, I anticipate for this to happen. Graves signed a lengthy deal with the Pittsburgh Penguins, 6 years worth $27 million, and he'll be paid annually $4.5 million. So the Ryan Graves fan page on Twitter, Alan Cosman, I thank you so much. thank you for all the great edits. Thank you for all the great contributions you've had on Devil's Discourse. And I'm sad that the tenure has now come to an end for Ryan Graves in New Jersey. But at the same time, it was going to happen because, unfortunately, I don't think the Devils could afford to keep him around. And Ryan Graves was sort of given a similar contract to John Marino. And that's saying something because I just talked about how useful Marino is on the blue line for Devils. And we saw his contribution on full display in Game 5 against the Carolina Hurricanes. But for Ryan Graves, he led the team in blocks. He led the team in defensive point shares. He was up there in plus minus. So Ryan Graves was a very impactful player for the Devils. Unfortunately, I don't think he was going to take a team-friendly deal in a weak free agent market. Someone like Ryan Graves was going to thrive in it, and he was able to latch onto a new home. It sucks that it's a divisional rival, so we're going to see Ryan Graves quite frequently throughout the course of the regular season. But Graves got paid, and I'm happy for him, and we'll see where it goes from here. But I think the Pittsburgh Penguins, they really added a very useful defenseman on their blue line. And once again, Graves can do a lot of things, and he is a winner, as proven in Colorado and also proven here in New Jersey. And now, probably the most shocking bit of news I got within the last few days, and that is Miles Wood and a 6-year contract with Colorado worth $15 million. He'll be paid annually $2.5, and he has a modified no-trade clause that will kick in next summer, 2024. And on that modified no-trade clause, he will not be able to be traded to 6 teams. So I was actually quite stunned. I was flabbergasted when I saw the news that Wood had signed a 6-year deal, let alone with a very good team in the Colorado Avalanche, because I made the prediction saying that Miles Wood, I know he's going to play come next year, but given how much his contributions have gone down and given his hip surgery that he had not too long ago, I was like, that might scare some teams away because he was a healthy scratch during the playoffs in round 1 against the New York Rangers after he was just being a goon out there and not helping the Devils win. And like I said in segment 2, sometimes Wood was just chaotic for his own good because while he knew how to skate fast, while he knew how to play aggressive, while he knew how to do a little bit of everything on the rink, he could just never contain it. And it was just wild and crazy. And sometimes you love it, sometimes you hate it. You love the passion, but once again, just you need to know how to dial it back a little bit, or at least control the beast a little bit. But for Miles Wood, like same situation for Severson, Blackwood, and Graves, I am happy for him. I don't agree with the contract at all. I think it's a little bit much, 6 years. It's not an expensive one, but not what I would have given Miles Wood. I thought he was going to be on the market for a few days. I thought teams will say, like, we can use him maybe to fill out our roster. And I was like, if he comes back to the Devils, I'm not going to complain. But yeah, I was quite surprised to see that. But congratulations to Miles Wood, Colorado Avalanche. You're getting a good depth piece, a good bottom 6 player who's capable of scoring, because Miles Wood was able to have a big showing offensively just a couple years ago during the 2021-56 COVID-shortened year. So I think the Colorado Avalanche are definitely going to like Miles Wood a lot, but just know, fair warning, he could be a little too crazy for his own good. And now let's talk about some players that are still available to pick up. So Tomas Tatar, he's 32. He had a pretty good season with the Devils last year. I wanted the Devils to re-sign him, but unfortunately, I just don't know what his asking price is going to be. And Ryan Novosinski recently tweeted out saying that he reached out to Tomas Tatar's agent, but he didn't hear anything in response. So I don't know what the case is for Tomas Tatar. He led the team in plus minus. He was able to have a bounce back year compared to his first season with the Devils. He can be a solid veteran on any team he plays on. He was able to lead the Montreal Canadiens in scoring a few years ago. So I'm a little stunned that Tomas Tatar is still on the open market, especially given how weak this free agent market is. So, yeah, Tomas Tatar, he needs to be latched onto a team ASAP. And now for Jesper Boquist, I guess I could talk about it now, but I wanted Jesper Boquist gone for the last couple seasons. And if you don't believe me, my avid listeners will vouch for me in this case, because I said that I think Boquist just, unfortunately, he eats up a roster spot because remember when he was on the third line with Yegor Sharangovich? It's the same issue that I had with Cher, which is he's a good player, but that third line was just uneventful. Like it was a line that we didn't really talk about all that often. And unfortunately for Jesper Boquist, he was just a player that was never talked about often. And when he was able to score, when he was able to get a few goals here and there, yes, it did spark some energy. And what I was very impressed from Boquist was that he was able to close out the 2021-2022 season on a high note, and he was basically able to put up a huge middle finger to the entire Devils discourse, including me, because I was like, okay, Boquist is showing something. But unfortunately, very, very, very inconsistent this year. Not really useful on the rink. I hope he gets latched onto a team, but I'm not. I have my doubts. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, but could be wrong. But Jesper Boquist, that was to be expected because the Devils have a lot of players in the pipeline. Tom Fitzgerald has said that he wants to give Nolan Foote a chance. Alexander Holtz needs a chance. Grzyok needs a chance. There's a lot of players behind Jesper Boquist that can be better than him potentially. And unfortunately, he just fell out of favoritism in this case. But there's my recap for free agent frenzy the last few days for the Devils. So let me know what you guys think. What are your thoughts on the two-way signings of Shalgren, Cristolo, and Dowley? And what did you think of the Colin Miller trade? What are your expectations for him? I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts. So leave a comment down below. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on podcast streaming service, hit me up on my personal Twitter page at TreyMatt4 or the show's Twitter page at Locked On Devils. As for today's episode, that's all the time I have for you. So continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day, New Jersey. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Thanks for listening once again.